In a top focus in World DNA, Israel continues to battle Hamas militants in several parts of Gaza, including in the main southern city of Khan Yunis.
Hundreds and thousands of residents have been urged to evacuate to an area with few facilities on the coast. Now, the Israeli military continues to escalate its bombardment and ground offensive. In the central Gaza Strip, a barrage of Israeli airstrikes repeatedly struck the town of Zoeda, killing at least 44 people.
احنا كنا في بيوتنا نايمين فالساعة 4 الفجر ما لقينا صاروخ انفجار مش طبيعي. يعني جينا ننقذ الناس كلهم هنا أشلاء. لقينا في دار كان يعني شاب مقطع تقطيع شلناه أشلاء، ولقينا مرة فوق غسان صاحبة البيت أشلاء فوق مقطع تقطيع والعمود فوق مليان دم وأشلاء. يعني احنا جينا سنة نشيل نازحين ونعزل كلهم عزل.
While in the north, tanks were seen moving towards the border fence with the Gaza Strip from southern Israel. And this as artillery fire constantly pounded residential areas. Soldiers on the ground advanced their attack as helicopters and fighter jets provided support from the air in the Gaza Strip.
And it's not just in the south of Israel where the Netanyahu-led government is carrying out their attacks. In the north of the country as well, Israel carried out airstrikes in the Bin Jabil district of Lebanon. According to Lebanon's state-run national news agency, several shells fell between homes in the town of Altra al-Shab, located in the south of Lebanon.
And on the other hand, Hamas has released a video showing rocket fire, smoke and helicopter in mid-flight, although it is not yet clear from where the rockets have been fired.
The military wing of Hamas, Al-Qassam Brigades, also released footage showing its fighters targeting the Israeli troops. The group claims the attacks were carried out in the outskirts of Khan Yunis in southern Gaza.
And heavy fighting raging across Gaza, both in the northern and the southern Gaza Strip, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has told Hamas to surrender. Netanyahu called for Hamas operatives to lay down their arms, saying that the Palestinian group's end was near. Take a listen.
בימים האחרונים עשרות מחבלי חמאס נכנעים בפני כוחותינו. הם מניחים את נשקם, הם מוסרים את עצמם לידי לוחמינו הגיבורים. זה ייקח עוד זמן, המלחמה בעיצומה, אבל זה תחילת הסוף של חמאס. ואני אומר למחבלי חמאס, זה נגמר. אל תמותו בשביל סינואר. תיכנו, עכשיו.
Israel, alongside, confirmed it has been detaining increasing numbers of Palestinian men for interrogation. The Israeli military spokesperson said that dozens of terrorists had surrendered to Israeli forces. Hagari said the arrests took place in two Hamas strongholds, Jabalia and Shujaiya.
אנחנו עצרנו עשרות שהם מחבלים. אני לא אנקוב ביחס לכמה באחוזים מתוך הזה, יש שם הרבה מאוד מחבלים שנכנעו, וזה דבר משמעותי, כי מדובר פה על סימנים שמחבלים שנמצאים במעוזים קשים מחליטים להיכנע. זה דבר חשוב מאוד.
Israel also offered explanation regarding photos depicting detained Palestinian men stripped down to their underwear circulated by media. Israel says the pictures represented routine security procedure to check the detainees were not wearing any hidden explosives.
Meanwhile, in the near future, there seems to be no relief for the hostages taken in by Hamas and their loved ones. The militant group engaged in a war with Israel in the Gaza Strip warns that no hostage will leave the territory alive unless the group's demands were met. Hamas military spokesperson says the release of those held in Gaza would not take place without an exchange and negotiation.
And for more on this, we're now being joined by Edward P. Joseph. Mr. Joseph is a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. Thank you so much for joining us on WION, Mr. Joseph.
Good to be with you.
Right, Mr. Joseph, the war has been raging, but Qatar still seems optimistic regarding a truce at the moment. How narrow is the window of truce here? Because Netanyahu has clearly said that he wants Hamas to be eliminated. Are you optimistic regarding a truce at the moment?
It's hard for anyone to be optimistic given the circumstances on the ground. And let's say first that anyone of good conscience has to, of course, be deeply concerned, distressed even by the suffering of innocent Palestinian civilians. There's just simply no question about that. At the same time, where there's a difference and a question is who bears the responsibility for that, or all the responsibility. Certainly Israel has its share of responsibility, and so does Hamas, and you alluded to this when you mentioned the hostages. Now, if Qatar is somehow optimistic about this, that's good to hear. That sounds like good news. But it's very unclear why that would be the case, particularly because Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who was in Israel on December 1st when the last ceasefire was broken, made it very clear that it was Hamas that had broken that ceasefire. It was very clear. He was in Jerusalem that day. In fact, there was a sniper attack in Jerusalem that killed 3 people, also which Secretary of State Blinken blamed on Hamas. Now, Blinken and the United States have made it very clear that they want Israel to do more, that according to Secretary Blinken, there is intent. He recognizes intent among the Israelis to be careful about their attacks and not to at all to hit civilians intentionally. But he says there's a gap between the intent and the results, and the United States has made it clear it wants better results on that score. Please.
Mr. Joseph, now the Palestinian leadership at the Doha forum mentioned U.S. name. It said that U.S. is equally responsible for the deaths that have taken place, deaths of Palestinians in Gaza, and also is responsible for the Israeli attacks behind it. Now, when you hold or see this statement along with the fact that U.S. had vetoed a ceasefire bid, how do you see this entire statement coming in from the Palestinian leadership?
Well, we have to be clear here if we're talking about Hamas leadership or Palestinian leadership, because that's not the same, and that's been a fundamental issue in any type of resolution.
So it was Palestinian Prime Minister, like they would refer to him, Mohammed Shatayyeh, who gave this statement. So, yes. Right.
Well, we have to be very clear that Hamas bears the most responsibility here, because on October 7th, Hamas is the one that broke the ceasefire. Hillary Clinton made this very clear because she negotiated the last ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And she stated very clearly it was Hamas that broke the ceasefire on October 7th with this horrific attack. An attack that was not just horrific in the numbers that of Israeli civilians who were killed, for example, 260 plus young people at a concert. It was the way they were killed, including with mass rape. And so this was not the move of a liberation front, of a group that wants liberation and peaceful coexistence. This was a move, as President Biden has said, nihilistic. That is, it was aimed to annihilate the Israeli population and the Jewish population, in fact. So that's the position of the United States. What we've seen in terms of demands for a permanent ceasefire, not only does President Biden not call for a permanent ceasefire, neither does the leader of the progressive wing in the Democratic Party, Bernie Sanders. And he spoke today on CBS News, and he says that Israel has to take much better care not to injure and kill Palestinian civilians, above all women and children. And he doesn't want, Senator Sanders, he doesn't want the United States just to give a blank check. But Senator Sanders made it very clear he does not call for a permanent ceasefire with Hamas. Here's the quote. I don't know how you can have a permanent ceasefire with Hamas, who has said before October 7th and after October 7th that they want to destroy Israel. They want a permanent war. And that's Senator Bernie Sanders, leader of the progressives in the Democratic Party. Please.
Right, Mr. Joseph, like you mentioned that Hamas is responsible for the current war that we're witnessing, but we cannot ignore the plight of Gazans. At least 18,000 Gazans have been killed in the ongoing war. My question to you is that at this point, where do they go? Because the war has been raging in the northern strip and the southern strip, and Egypt has also made it very clear on its stance to not take any refugees. What's left of the Gazans at the moment?
Well, I've pointed that out from the beginning. At the top of this interview, I pointed out that all of us have to be deeply distressed at the plight of Palestinian civilians. The number I've heard is actually 16,000, but still, every innocent Palestinian death, above all children, is a tragedy. And again, the question is how best to address that. Look what Senator Sanders said, the importance of this, that a permanent ceasefire simply plays into the hands of Hamas. This was part of the strategy on October 7th. We have to bear that in mind. It wasn't just, well, we report a little bit and we remember some bad things that happened on October 7th. It's the intent. The intent here was not any type of peaceful coexistence. It was annihilation. And that was how Hamas calculated. They calculated that Israel would be divided. It is not. Israel is incredibly unified. And it also banked that Israel would not be able to mount this. Now, the calls here that are interesting are the calls in your report from Hamas about the ceasefire, because that raises the question whether, in fact, the Israeli military operation is achieving the results. That's the unknown here. We know the plight of the Palestinian civilians, and we all have to be deeply concerned. Secretary Blinken, President Biden are making that clear to the Israelis. They have to do better. They have to be more careful, give more notice. Now, you mentioned Egypt. What is not clear here is why Egypt would not allow voluntarily those Palestinians who want to leave, in particular women and children. Why not allow them to leave? As long as it's completely voluntary on their part, as long as it's not Israelis who are demanding that they leave forcibly. But we have to bear in mind here, Israel has its responsibility. Egypt also has responsibility because it controls the border. But above all, Hamas, which launched this war, has the key responsibility and could end all of this suffering by releasing the hostages and having its leadership depart. Please.
All right, Mr. Joseph, thank you so much for joining in on World DNA. Always nice to have your insights on training issues, of course. And right now, the Israel-Hamas war is something that hopefully should conclude at the earliest, but we're not seeing any signs of a ceasefire anytime soon. Thank you so much for joining in.
You're welcome.